What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for as time progresses. I'm also going to talk about why tomorrow is going to be another very important day, as we have more big bank earnings coming out, not to mention some economic data. But before I break anything down, all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed up to 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and this offer ends very, very soon. Anyways, now let's break down what's going on with the market. Looking at SPY, we can see there's some interesting developments on the chart as this thing's been hitting this resistance very close to 478. But the question is, will this thing break out going into tomorrow, or is it going to end up failing? I'll be breaking down more details about this later on. But don't forget, guys, today is MLK Day. It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I hope you guys are, spending time with people you love. I hope most of you have holidays and you're watching some football or doing something fun. It's a very important day to remember our privileges and the fact that freedom is not free. And this is the reason why the stock market is closed today. But going into tomorrow, it's going to be very interesting since we have more data coming out. Now, for tomorrow, it's going to be Tuesday. Before the market opens, we have Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, PNC Bank, and a bunch of other banks announcing earnings again. This is going to affect the market. It may cause the market to push or maybe even drop, depending on how their earnings end up looking. But I want to note that when the bank earnings came out on Friday, they were pretty mixed overall. We had some beats on EPS, some misses on revenue, back and forth. And some banks had relatively decent guidances, other ones were not as strong. So overall, I would say it was a very mixed report from Friday, and there's a very good chance we might see something similar for Tuesday. The high interest rate environment right now is not the best for the banks. So this is very important. It's actually causing some hardships for them. So that's why these earnings may not be the strongest. But the market's response does not have to always be mixed. It doesn't always have to be negative. We'll have to see how it goes from there. But just be prepared for this. When the market opens, we're going to see a reaction to these big bank earnings. We'll see how it goes going forward. I also wanted to mention that when it comes to economic data, the data for tomorrow is very, very minor. We have the New York Empire State Manufacturing Index coming out at 8:30 a.m., 1 hour before the market opens. Very minor data, shouldn't cause anything too crazy. We have Waller from the Fed giving a speech at 11 o'clock a.m. Then at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the 3-month bill auction and the 6-month bill, the 6-month bill auction also coming out. And that's pretty much it when it comes to economic data. Everything else is very minor. But around 11 to 12, that's when I'd be watching for some more volatility, Eastern Standard Time. We'll see what the data causes. Now, as far as the Fear and Greed Index goes, this is very, very interesting. This used to be at extreme greed. Now it's just at greed. This is being adjusted just a little bit as the market's becoming less and less greedy. We're not pushing as hard. We're kind of like range bound. So we'll be watching to see if this changes or not, but always be very careful in looking at this because we were at extreme greed for quite some time before the market started to, before this started to turn back down. So we'll see if this continues to shift leftwards, if the market drops more or not. So we'll be watching that very carefully. Now, on top of this, the market is at extreme greed when it comes to market momentum. That's a big warning sign to be very careful, as the market still is in a way kind of like overbought. And with market momentum at this extreme level, you want to be very careful. The put and call positioning right now, this used to be at extreme greed. Now it's just at greed, as we're starting to see more puts being bought up. So be very careful right now in the markets. Generally, when this happens, when we get this transition, that's when the market is topping. Be very, very careful. Now, when it comes to the Fed, I just want to call out one thing real quick. Right now, the Fed is not really making a big adjustment, or at least the market is not really adjusting to the Fed as much. We will see if this changes, because if this bar right here starts going down and then this bar starts going up, this would signify that the market is not as confident in the Fed basically giving us a cut. The market was thinking the Fed was going to cut in March, but we're not as certain right now because it depends on the inflationary data. CPI was a little bit hotter than expected, and that's why you want to be very careful with this. If this does start shifting, this is going to cause more volatility in the markets. So be very careful in looking at what the Fed is likely projected to do according to the markets. Now let's talk about the charts. How are things looking? Well, this is very simple. If you look at SPY, we have some tight resistance at 478. We hit it, rejected, hit it, rejected, hit it again, rejected. It's very tough to break 478. And and we're seeing lots of liquidity touches right over here. They're also trying to grab these stops, but it's overall it's just really struggling to break above that. When the banks announced their earnings on Friday, the market actually pushed for the first hour, came back down, and then just traded sideways for pretty much the entire day. Very boring. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something similar for tomorrow, but this is how I would see it. So on the daily time frame, if you look at SPY, we actually have a big bearish divergence developing, which suggests that the market could top soon. But what I think is going to happen is the market is going to likely attempt to push a little higher. It might try to grab some more liquidity when we open. So I'm going to be watching to see if we could try to make our way back up to 478 or not, to 480. But I don't see the market holding above 480 for a long period of time, or even like getting up there. It might try to push a little bit, grab liquidity up here, then start selling off. But I think later on, as the weeks pass, I think there's going to be downside coming. That's kind of like my view of SPY right now, because when you look at the 4-hour time frame, this is already starting to turn a bit. It's not looking as strong as before. We have those bearish divergences and such. So from the way I see things, I think that SPY is going to cool off. The market's going to cool off soon. Before we cool off, we might try to hover in these higher levels for an extended period of time. But ultimately, I do have that view. So what is SPY going to likely do tomorrow? I think that depending on the bank earnings, which I can't predict, but I think there's a good chance it's going to pop again. They might try to grab liquidity again around these high levels, 478 to 480. Then I think the market's going to turn back down. I think it's going to start sinking as time goes on. And I think we're going to eventually see this thing retrace a bit. So when it comes to where we currently are, SPY is currently at 475.7. If we sink lower, watch 475.5 as support, 475 flat. If we lose 475, our next target is going to be 474 to 473.8. And if that fails us, there's 472.9 and 472 flats, followed by much lower levels like 470. For resistance, make sure you watch 476. If it breaks above this, there's some resistance at 477. It's not as tight as 478, however, and the tighter resistance is 478. If it does manage to break this, our next target is 480, but I don't really think it would last really long in this level. That's very close to where the all-time high happens to be. What do I think is going to happen? I think the most likely possibility is, because I just want to note, I don't know what the bank earnings are going to be like, so I can't make any promises, but I think there's a good chance we might pop when we open, just like how we did on Friday. But then I think the market will ultimately drop, so we might pop, grab liquidity, then come back down. I think SPY will eventually retrace over the next couple of days and make its way down to the lower levels, all the way back down to the 472s. That's my prediction, a pop and drop like move coming to the markets. For the QQQ, I think we might see something very similar. I mean, we're forming this like wedge, but now we're actually starting to break the downside. I wouldn't be surprised if the QQQ does something very similar. Watch 410 as resistance and then 412. For support, make sure you watch 408, 405.7, followed by 404 and 402. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing kind of pushes up into the 410s just a little bit, retests this high rate here, grabs liquidity, and eventually sells off towards 408. And if that fails us, I think we're going to come down to 406. So a little pop and drop is what I'm predicting, but watch your levels just to be safe. It could even take a couple of days to pan out, but I find that to be very probable. As far as Tesla goes, Tesla's in a very critical level right now, because I'm going to show you the levels on Tesla. So we have this nice downtrend on Tesla. We'll see if this could break or not, but here's the most important level I'm going to be watching for. Go to the weekly time frame. Let me actually switch this. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm going to switch to the moving averages. I just wanted to show you guys this. On the weekly time frame, it's very critical that Tesla holds the 200 moving average at 217.5. If we hold this for some time, we could see a backtest of 224 and some more sideways price action. But if we fail to hold, if we end up breaking below this, we're going to be sinking back down towards 200. I think there's a very good chance it's going to sink lower, so be very careful. I do want to mention, though, that the weekly looks bearish right now on Tesla. So the odds do favor this thing eventually losing the 200 moving average on the weekly. There's a very good chance it's going to lose it, but just to be safe, we have to watch it happen in real time, because I can't always predict the news. We have to watch and see it happen before we can truly turn extremely bearish. But I do want to note, the technicals do look weak on Tesla. It is looking pretty weak to me, so there's a very high probability it's going to eventually lose that support. So with that being said, what do I see happening to the share price? Well, generally when we open, we tend to see Tesla pop a little bit, so I wouldn't be surprised if Tesla tries to push up, back up towards 220. Maybe it tries to grab this wick right here at 222 to 222.5. Then above that, I mean, we have more resistance levels such as 223.5, 225, 226, 228, and then 230. We have tight resistance at all of those. Our support is 217.5, which is critical, and then we have this 215 zone, 213.8, 212, and 210. My prediction is it's going to pop first. I think it might pop a little bit when we open with the market. Could try to get back into the very low 220s, but then I think Tesla will fail just like how it did on Friday, and it's going to just trade sideways. I think it's going to backtest 217 again, just trade sideways around that. I don't know if we're going to lose it tomorrow, but in the future, there's a good chance it might actually lose 217 and then start sinking back down to these lower levels down here. So there's a risk of that looking at the current technicals, but we have to watch it lose the 200 moving average first just for confirmation. But I think it might pop and drop, so just be very careful with Tesla. As far as the other stocks out there go, such as Nvidia, I think Nvidia is going to do something similar. Now, Nvidia is looking pretty decent right now. It's actually forming a very, very nice wedge. If Nvidia breaks to the upside, I think it could push back up for 550 or so into the 552 area. So it could push up just a little bit, trade sideways, but then I think eventually it's going to sell off. I think that what's going to happen to Nvidia is this. Eventually, there's going to be some kind of sell-off coming. I think it's going to sell off eventually over the next few weeks. But before it sells off, we might get one more push up in this level, kind of trade sideways up here, grab more liquidity up here first before they get ready to short it at a much better place. There's a very good chance it's going to do that first before it ends up selling off. So we'll see if this thing gets one more pop first before it ends up happening. Watch resistance at 550, 551.6, which is very minor. 552 is stronger, than 555 is going to be stronger resistance. For support, watch 445. If that fails us, there's 442. Sorry, did I say 4? I'm sorry, I meant 5. Sorry, I'm so sorry about that, guys. I'm referring to 545. Below that, we have 542. If we lose that, there's 540, 536, and then these lower levels such as 533 and 530. In my opinion, the most likely possibility, it depends on which way we break from this little pennant that's forming. We might see this thing pop a little bit at first, though. There's a good chance they might want to grab more liquidity first before they break this thing back down. So look for a little pop and drop on Nvidia. Be very careful with it anyways. Aapl has a very similar setup as some other tickers I just mentioned. Aapl is forming kind of like a rising wedge-like pattern, so I wouldn't be surprised if this thing kind of pops a little bit, trades sideways, and ends up failing. But here's my view of this thing. If you want to be bullish on Aapl, we need to see it break this high up here at 188. If it breaks that, we could turn bullish. If we fail and we end up losing 183.5, we're going to turn a lot more bearish, and this thing is going to start sinking. Now, I want to call out one more thing. Aapl does have a bearish setup right now. We have a head and shoulders like structure. This will likely play out, but in order for us to invalidate this, we have to break 188. So the most likely possibility is this. Aapl could push a little bit more, kind of trade sideways, but with this head and shoulders, if we end up losing 185, watch support at the lower levels, and it's going to likely start sinking. So here are the levels before I break down my prediction. Watch resistance very close to 186.5. If it breaks that, there's 187.5 to 188. Watch those levels. If 188 breaks, we could get closer to 190. For support, make sure you watch 185. If we lose this, 184.25 is the next level. 183.5 is the most important support in my opinion. If that fails us, we're going to be sinking towards the lower 180s. What do I think is going to happen to Aapl? Here's my prediction. With this head and shoulders, there's a very good chance it might actually push a little bit higher. Could try to maintain this rising wedge for a little bit longer. But once this breaks, if we end up getting a break soon, which I think there's a very good chance it's going to happen, that's going to lower the markets. This could sink the markets a little bit. So you want to be very careful. I predict it's going to push a little higher, maintain the wedge for some extended period of time, approach 186.5. But I think that if it fails to break that, there's going to be a break to the downside coming. There's definitely a high risk of that happening looking at the current setup. So a little push, a maintenance of this wedge before it breaks down is very probable. With that being said, since it's a holiday, I'm going to try to be quick with this video. I'm just going to go over a couple more things which are worth noting before I get into more details. So for SoFi, I just want to call out that this is looking kind of weak. It is trying to base at 7.8, but going back on the charts right here, I'm going to switch to the daily so I can actually go back further in a shorter period of time. We're approaching the daily 200 EMA at 7.86. We'll see if this holds or not. It might actually attempt to rebound a bit, depending on the bank earnings. Could retest 8 and then reject. But if we lose 7.8, we're going to be on our way to 7.6 and 7.5. In my opinion, there's a risk of it coming down. It looks very weak on the dailies, but a pop and drop is still a possibility. The Russell 2000, it's very flat right now. It's looking kind of bearish. If we lose 192.5, there's a risk of it coming down to 188.7, very close to 189. It is looking kind of bearish with the head and shoulders like structure. There's going to be a risk of downside coming. There's going to be a little risk. We have this imbalance down here towards 186, which is going to drag it down. So this looks bearish to me. This actually favors the bears a little bit more. Could it pop to 194 and then reject? That's always a possibility, but it looks like it's going to sink towards 188. So the IWM looks a little bearish to me. Let me just double check this. Microsoft, this is still looking strong on the daily. It could retest 390, but we'll have to see if this breaks or not. Last time it hit this, it rejected. So look for a test of 390. If that breaks, 392 is going to be our next target. Watch that carefully, and Microsoft might push first and reject, or kind of like push up there. But I could see a little bit more upside coming first before it rejects. For AMD, let me double check this. AMD, to me, it could be forming a double top here, guys. Be a little bit careful. If this is a flag that's forming, there could be one more push for like 151 and then rejection back down. If it fails to get that push and we lose 145, if we close below that, our next target is going to be 141. We actually have this nice gap down here to fill, but I think 141 is coming for the 20 EMA on the daily. So a pop and drop is very possible for a little bit of downside on AMD. The VIX is very important. Okay, basically the VIX has this support around 11.8 right here. It could drop to 11.8 to 11.9 and then bounce, or it could bounce from here, which tells me that the market might sell off soon, or the market might push one more time towards 11.8. The market may push, which drags us down to 11.8, and then this thing bounces. So what does it mean for the markets? Once again, either the market sells off or the market pops a little bit more, and then we get a sell-off. But this is what the VIX is starting to suggest because we're at critical support right now. The dollar, it's kind of flat, but it's trying to break out towards 102.8, that 50 EMA on the daily. If we're bullish and we break this is going to be a bearish signal for the market. So I'm going to be paying very close attention to the dollar. If it breaks the 50 EMA on the daily, it's going to be pushing much quicker, and that's going to be bearish for the markets. Coinbase has been just getting decimated with all the SEC news and such, but long term, I'm still a big bull on it. This kind of resembles a head and shoulders like structure. We're going to be watching the support around 126, I believe it is, 125 to 126. It might test that. It looks very bearish right now on the daily, so be very careful with that. On Google's looking a little bit weaker. We're forming, let me just double check this. This is a bearish divergence that's forming on it, but it hasn't fully rejected below the 5 EMA. If it loses 143, that's very close to where the 5 EMA happens to be. We're going to be looking for 140 to be tested. There might be a rejection and move to the downside coming, so watch it very carefully. So there's a risk of that on Google. For Amazon, I think it might retrace towards 153. If that fails us, there's 150.6 that's coming next. There's a good chance it might sell off a little bit, so be very careful. I also want to mention that we have this gap over here on Amazon at 151. So there's a very good chance Amazon's going to sell off towards that level. Very good chance of that, looking at this current setup. If we lose 153, especially, that's going to be our confirmation to 5 EMA. 152.99 to be exact. If we lose that, it's going to sell off to fill that gap in the 151s and eventually try to bounce or even test the daily 20 EMA. So there's a risk of some downside, guys. Be a little bit careful. For Meta, it's showing sometimes some signs of trying to top, but I haven't officially seen this breakout yet because we technically have higher highs and higher lows. We have a nice 5-wave sequence as well. It looks pretty nice on Meta. But the issue is it hasn't really rejected yet. So there's still potential for it to get up to 380 and then reject. This chart still is bullish overall. It's still bullish. There's no sign of it breaking yet. So we have to be very patient on Meta. 380 is a possibility before it ends up rejecting. But watch tight resistance at 377 to 380. We'll see if it rejects or not. But overall, the chart is still favoring the bulls on Meta. So that being said, the market's kind of mixed. There's some tech stocks which are showing some strength. Others are starting to show some weakness. But I do want to note that Aapl and Nvidia are going to be two of the most important ones. We'll see how this goes, and we'll see how things look. As far as my predictions go, I can't be 100% accurate for my morning prediction because it depends on the bank earnings. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about the bank earnings. So that being said, have a great day, guys. Remain calm, cool, and collected. We'll see how the earnings look, and I'll see you guys very soon tomorrow morning to discuss more matters about the market. Thank you for listening. Have a great Martin Luther King weekend. I'll see you guys very soon tomorrow morning, and peace out.